Um, okay, so let's say I have a software supply chain and I want to go from where I am to somewhere better. How do I do that? Okay. You generally get the most security value. First of all, fix anything that's badly broken. If you are just like W getting like or curling code off of some repo on the internet as part of your like build process for bringing in dependencies, then fix that. Don't do that. Um, After that, probably the next easiest and next most valuable thing is probably to use in-toto to document your process, because this forces you to understand your process. And actually, just the act of understanding what you're doing and how you're doing it can be very informative for people, especially if you weren't the one who started the project. I've been in a meeting um, under NDA, I can only say a little, with a top 5 tech company, and I asked what I thought was a very simple question. And then after I asked it, everybody looked at each other, and then someone ran out of the room. And 2 hours later, they released a security advisory. I didn't get credit for it, but they released a security advisory for something. So knowing what you're doing is really important, and it's not that uncommon. Okay. After this, you probably want to turn on, if you're using GitHub, like multi-factor authentication, or you want to enforce Git signing in some way. Ideally, you can use YubiKeys or something like that. They're super cheap. They're usable. There might be some developer resistance, but they're well worth doing if you can do it. Things like Tough or Uptane, if you have to do them yourself, probably fall in here. Sometimes you'll get a product that wraps a lot of this up for you, so it might actually be easier. Then you need to start to audit things like your dependencies. And then after this, probably the hardest one to do is to do things like reproducible builds. This actually requires a fair amount of work in a lot of cases. But if you can get there, it's worth it. And yeah, as I said, this list is roughly in order from easiest to hardest as well. So start at the top and work your way down would be my suggestion. All right. Should I make my own supply chain, security system, schema, whatever? I wouldn't do that. Just in general, it's a really bad idea. If everything you're doing, your hardware, your OS, your compiler, your repository, your client devices, everything you're doing for yourself and only using yourself, and no one else ever needs to validate anything you're doing, then maybe you can do it, okay? But in practice, this just doesn't happen. So you should just use like open standards that exist for how to specify this information. And some of these are also flexible. So if you have a field that nobody else has because no one else cares about the amount of voltage going into the build farm when you do a build, which I don't know why you care about it, but whatever. If there's something that matters to you that doesn't matter to anybody else, like these frameworks have extensibility, so you can specify them that way. And you also, I want to urge you, when you make this change to document what you're doing, you might as well sign the damn thing and might as well use it to check things, because that's going to be the next frontier of us nagging people for 5 years to fix things. So cryptographically sign and verify it, and that's basically always going to be using in-toto today. Okay, so what about blockchain, post-quantum crypto, whatever the latest thing that somebody higher up than you read about in a magazine and wants you to look into, okay? Well, that's what we get to do. We're academics, right? We get to like try some of this stuff out. So there is actually a post-quantum crypto support for Tough in a branch off somewhere that you could play with if you wanted to. There's IPFS, like a blockchain technology support substrate for Tough in a PR, right? There's all this sort of stuff out there. And so, if you want to look at something or explore something or show something to somebody, you can probably do it. Now, these are not parts of the specification. It's not something that if you use Uptane, you have to use, you will use blockchain or whatever. It's just not that way. But if you want to experiment with something that's a little further out there, we might already have a branch somewhere that you can play with and show. And if we do get enough adoption of something, then we can make it optional in the spec or a supported thing if it becomes an important use case for people. Okay, how do I secure hardware components? So Suppliers are really key. So I think the hardware security folks are much further ahead of things in the software supply chain. Like hardware supply chain folks have realized we have to worry about who's making our chips for quite a while now. And the software folks, I think the SolarWinds hack was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. So you may see tools that try to tell you what is in a piece of firmware and provide you with like a scan of that information. Okay. They're actually very good for catching bad practices, like somebody who builds something and puts a bunch of stuff in there because they don't know what they're doing. But they will not catch someone who's trying to hide things, someone who's actually malicious, okay? And I think that the salespeople of these tools will not tell you this distinction, okay? So I'm not saying that this value proposition here is bad. Like catching people who do stupid stuff is good, but they're just not going to ever be effective here, okay? Just fundamentally for a bunch of reasons I can talk about some other time. So you should just track your hardware supply chain firmware using known techniques. I claim that in-toto can handle this because we've had a few different groups talk with us about stuff they're doing there, but they're really small groups and we don't really have any public data we can make public. So if you do try to do this, please chat with us about rough edges, ideally producing a blog post or white paper we can talk about. If this doesn't work perfectly and you have things that need to be tweaked or changed, that would not surprise me, right? I mean, these specifications and these systems didn't come out fully formed. They came with partnerships, okay? How do I get an Optane or Tough or whatever for domain X? Okay, so this is not as relevant because you can buy a version of it that's been nicely customized in general for IoT domain. But if you need, for some reason, something without that, where there needs to be something that's more customized, then let us know. Our projects have very heavy community collaboration, lots of participation from different groups. Share problems with us, ideally on the record. You help us convince government and regulators, and then we get our money from government and regulators. We actually don't take money from industry. So this is intentional because usually if I were to go to, like I'm going to Cloud Native Con next week to speak there, and if I were to go give a talk and say this is a product that is paid for by Microsoft and Google, then a lot of their competitors wouldn't be very happy to perhaps use it. So the fact that we're getting our money from the government and not from industry is actually beneficial in some ways for adoption. And even if it's not funded, we will help you. We have not had funding for Tough for most of the lifetime of Tough, because Tough has been around more than, it's been around more than 10 years now. And Optane, we haven't had funding for the last 3 years or something, but the project is still growing strong and accelerating in use and stuff like that. We just have to lean a little bit more on our industry partners to do things that otherwise we would do internally. Okay, so last slide, wrapping up. Securing devices is a major challenge. Nation-state actors are definitely more aggressive than ever before, so this is something you should really be worried about. Regulation is increasing in this space, but fortunately tools are also improving, so there's lots of stuff you can use here. If you have things you need, you have problems, or you try to use some of the stuff we're doing and you have issues, or you want to know if what we're doing actually applies well, then reach out. Talk to us about problems and pain points, and with the right effort, you can be in the group that stays ahead of the attackers. So thank you very much.